Welcome everyone. My name is Christy Scheffler and I am part of the team at the National ECE Workforce Center. And following our recent research to practice brief, incorporating early educators' experience into career pathways, we are really excited to join you today, talking together with you about ways that states and communities are thinking about career pathways in ways that recognize the knowledge and competencies gained through experience in the field. All right, and I guess that's me doing slides. There we go. So to start, we do want to note that our center is supported by a grant from the Administration for Children and Families. While ACF is the source of our center's funding, we don't necessarily reflect the views or the opinions of ACF, including the Office of Early Childhood Development, the Office of Head Start, and the Office of Child Care. All right. So who are we? Just to center why we're here today, what we're talking through. The National ECE Workforce Center is a joint research and technical assistance center that supports state, territory, tribe, community, and program leaders to improve the systems that support the ECE workforce. Specifically, we're currently focused on supporting competitive compensation and clear and accessible career pathways for the incumbent workforce. Like other TA centers, we provide services across a continuum of universal and targeted and intensive supports. And each of our services include a unique blend of research and TA. One key feature of what we do is that all of our supports are grounded in our systems change framework and in adult learning principles. Through our coffee chat today, for example, we are building on one of our universal resources, a research to practice brief, and providing you with a targeted opportunity to engage with peers and with folks from our team to hopefully help us all learn something and walk away poised for action. So coffee chats. Coffee chats are designed to be an informal opportunity for systems leaders to actively engage in discussion and planning around the different topics related to strengthening the systems supporting the workforce. Each coffee chat focuses on a specific product that's been released from our center. Like today's coffee chat is focused on the research to practice brief we mentioned. The authors are joining us for these discussions, walk us through a brief recap of the topic that we're talking about, and then we spend the majority of our time together in smaller breakout rooms where we can share with and hear from colleagues about what the topics currently look like in your context, what they could look like in your context, and start to identify some next steps we can take to move in that direction. A couple of housekeeping notes to get started. If it would be helpful to you, you can turn on closed captioning by clicking More on your Zoom taskbar and selecting the language that you would like for captions. Since these chats are set up as a conversation more than a webinar, if you're comfortable and your technology allows, we do appreciate having your cameras turned on. We ask that you keep your microphone muted during this first recap portion, and then as we shift to the breakout rooms, we would love to hear from you directly. And you are welcome to submit questions and comments in the chat, and if there aren't items that we cover during today's sessions, we can follow up with you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie Pascal, one of the deputy directors here at the Workforce Center, to get us started with the recap of the brief, so we're all set to move into conversations.
Great. Thanks so much, Christy. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Pascal, and I am calling in today from my home in Phoenix, Arizona. Again, it's nice to see familiar names, some new names, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So I'll go ahead and give you a brief overview of the research to practice brief in case it's not fresh in your mind. So it's part of our research to practice brief series. And in that series, we're trying to highlight the evidence for various strategies that help improve compensation, career advancement, and working conditions for the workforce. So the evidence in this brief was based on a large-scale scan of literature. So that is published research literature and peer-reviewed articles, as well as reports, state reports, evaluations, and we also looked at other technical assistance resources. We also scanned multiple states, upwards of about 20 states, different career pathways or career ladders or career lattice documents that were publicly available. And a couple of years ago, our center team also interviewed educators, and we asked them specifically about career advancement. So they were able to reflect on sort of the facilitators and barriers to their own career advancement, and some of that information was used to inform the brief. This brief, as it's focused on experience, when I'm in conversations where we talk about incorporating experience into career pathways, I often hear the conversation kind of turn to experience versus education, as though these two things are head to head. And that's not really the framing or the paradigm that we brought to this particular brief. This brief frames under a competency-based framework. So acknowledging that educators are gaining competencies in a lot of different ways, from professional development to higher education to credentialing to other supervised experiences. So if you frame under a competency-based framework, it lets you ask the question, how are educators gaining competencies and what competencies are they gaining from each of these different sources? So we know that experience is one vehicle by which people gain competencies. But what we're not seeing is we're not seeing that really clearly translated into many states' career pathways or career lattices as to how experience factors into career advancement. So we really wanted to ask in this brief, how can experience fit into a competency-based framework? How can they be evaluated to support professional advancement? And when we looked at the literature and we looked at what states were doing to try and incorporate experience, we saw two strategies. So that's the bulk of the brief, is talking about these two strategies for incorporating experience as a pathway for career entry and career advancement. And then we highlight some specific examples. Some background context that is in the brief and that I think is important context that many of you probably know about the workforce is that the workforce is highly experienced. Over half of center lead educators and more than 2/3 of family childcare educators have over 10 years of experience. As I said before, field experience can confer competencies, and we know that broadly, our ECE prep programs, as well as different kinds of earn and learn models, apprenticeships, the CDA, these things are actually growing in their popularity and in their reach. And that's because we know that supervised experience is a really important way that people gain foundational competencies as well as more advanced competencies. But right now, the only way that we tend to see experience show up in career lattices is in sort of minimum qualifications. And we still don't even see that broadly across all 50 states. So we have some numbers here. About 11 states have experience as minimum qualification for center-based lead educators. Only 3 have it at all for family childcare providers, and only 4 states have it for center directors. And it's typically somewhere between 1 to 3 years for those lead educators and up to about 3 to 5 for the center directors. But it's not really diffused across the country. Go to the next slide. So when we looked at the policy landscape to see, okay, what are states doing? Well, first we looked at their CCDF plans to see what they are thinking. And we saw that over half of states, so this is all states and DC and not Wyoming, because we didn't have Wyoming's plan, but at least 32 of those 50 states indicated that they were interested in updating their career pathways, specifically revising their career ladders or career lattices, which opens up the opportunity for them to think a little bit differently. And we've certainly seen more and more states moving to the lattice model, which is the multiple pathways articulating multiple roles and offering sort of different pathways via coursework, training, and a new interest or a renewed commitment to thinking about experience. In terms of who's thinking about a competency-based framework, in those CCDF plans, we saw 6 states specifically call out that they already have or plan to adopt a competency-based framework for professional development, which is great because that allows them to align those competencies across multiple parts of the early childhood sector. And what we saw is that multiple states are developing state-specific credentials. Would love to hear your reflections on this during the discussion. If you are from a state that has developed one, is thinking about developing one. And with those state-specific credentials, that's where we see this latticing really coming to life, it seems, that often these credentials can be earned through a variety of different professional development activities. And I'll give you an example of Colorado in a couple of slides. These state-specific credentials, though, the devil is in the details. Some of them are stackable. Some of them can translate over to higher ed. Some of them don't. Some of them are kind of just, you can get the credential and that's it. That's kind of as far as you can go. And then you would need to jump to another track if you wanted to advance. So would love to talk about sort of the pros and cons of these offerings and which segments of the workforce are they serving? Which segments of the workforce are they not serving? What we do know is that, again, in the spirit of this isn't about experience versus education, this is about thinking about the various ways that people gain competencies. We know that nearly every single state continues to prioritize increased access to higher ed. The ways in which they're doing this are varied, and the Workforce Center has looked at that. And again, we'd love to know what's happening in your context to help increase access to higher education. And we'll talk about our first strategy is really about mirroring experience and higher education. So the first main and most popular strategy that we see, and the one that has the most evidence for it, is credit for prior learning. So credit for prior learning is a mechanism by which you can take the competencies that you've gained from experience and or any other sort of previous training and learning and have that assessed via an exam, a portfolio-based assessment, an observation, and then it can translate into specific course credit. Lots of variation here within states, across states in what that previous learning can translate into how many credits, into which courses, into what institutions within your state. But we know that this is a very popular strategy, and in part because there's compelling research evidence for it. Higher degree completion rates. That's a big thing that we want to see, right? If we're going to increase access to higher ed, we want people to have a pathway to actually complete their degree. Students are earning degrees faster, right? Because they're able to translate their previous knowledge into course credit and sort of have a shorter time to graduation, which also saves them thousands of dollars in the process. And there's evidence that tells us that colleges that offer credit for prior learning are more attractive to students. That evidence is not specific just to early childhood. It's sort of broadly across majors, but I do think has implications for early childhood as well. So that's the first strategy that we cover in the brief. The second one is one that has less research evidence for it because it's newer and it's really based on states trying to innovate to meet their current educator population. So our goal in the center is to try to provide the best research-based evidence that we can to help guide decision-making and policy. And this is where we don't have quite as much, but it's where we hope to have some good, rich conversations and be learning alongside you. When we think about experience as a pathway, you can kind of think about it in two buckets. One bucket is experience alone as an equivalency for education. We found that only one state right now is really offering that, and that's Washington. It's a time-limited pathway because they did increase their education requirements for their workforce. And so they said, okay, we're going to give you like this 7-year window to get up to speed on those education requirements, and we're going to grandfather in people who have at least 10 years of experience by the conclusion of that time window, and allow them to obtain the qualification to be a lead educator, for example. That's the only state that we saw that was offering this sort of experience alone as an equivalency. Otherwise, the second bucket would be folks who are looking at experience and other coursework and training and allowing that to be a pathway for advancement. Colorado has a points-based credential where you get points for experience, but you also get points for degrees, coursework, training, and observation. I'll show that to you in a moment. And North Carolina has also innovated with their state credential. They have an equivalency exam, and if you pass that exam, you get this state-sponsored credential that lets you be a lead educator. And in theory, you could pass that exam from any multitude of ways that you could have gathered competencies, including through experience alone. So those stand out as kind of three unique examples that we've seen. Would love to hear more from you all. Go ahead. This is the Colorado Early Childhood Professional Credential, ECPC. And I know it's a lot to digest, but basically they award points based on formal education, ongoing professional development, experience, and demonstrated competencies. And different points levels confer, or different amounts of points confer different levels, which open up the opportunity to serve in different roles. So you can kind of have a combination of different points. The points expire after a certain amount of time, just like in a lot of career pathways where you would need to continue to do more trainings or keep accruing experience and have a demonstrated observation. So it's not really it's not a static credential necessarily. But this is one of the most innovative sort of state-sponsored credentials that we've seen that helps incorporate experience as something that can allow you not only to have sort of entry into the field, but advancement into higher roles. So we have laid out in this brief, given the limited evidence that exists, a lot of questions that can help guide states' work as they think about how they want to incorporate experience into their career pathways. So we've listed out questions for different groups of folks. So if you are a leader in your community or in your state system, you have one of those seats at the table. We're really asking folks to start thinking about these competency-based frameworks and how ready is your state or community to evaluate aligned competencies across the professional development system? Because until there's alignment or until there's common understanding and alignment of the core competencies for each role, it's going to be really difficult to think about how experience, what competencies are gained from experience, and how that translates into this competency-based framework. The second thing that we hear a lot is about the relationship and working with higher education, as well as these other working with state systems, working with educator groups and educator serving organizations, and how are those three entities all working together to come to agreement about the competencies in a competency-based framework. Obviously, working with higher education is extremely important as it relates to credit for prior learning. So we want to know a bit more from any of our higher ed folks on the call, how they're thinking about experience and how that translates into course credit, and how all of these various stakeholders can be working together towards a single competency-based framework. I'm ready for the next slide. So once we start thinking about experience, I do think we need to be thinking about access to education. So we need to think about we need to understand a little bit more about our workforce. So how many years of experience does the workforce in my community already have? How much are we trying to meet the need of our current workforce? How much are we trying to offer advancement to our incoming workforce? Who are we trying to serve? What are their needs? And there are likely differences in educational attainment among the educators in your state and community. What are the root causes of those educational attainment differences? The answer to that question might be helpful in deciding strategy. Like, is credit for prior learning going to really help more educators attain an associate's and a bachelor's degree? Or is that maybe not the right solution because the root causes of educational attainment don't have to do with maybe long times to degrees, or folks feeling like they have to kind of take the same courses over and over, and so they're not really interested in attaining higher ed. We also think that folks should consider how to engage with the workforce directly, and that includes not only center and home-based educators, but administrators, understanding the opportunities and challenges of experience equivalencies or experience-based pathways. What do they think? Do they think that experience-based equivalencies are going to help their workforce, or do they think that there might be some unintended consequences? That's sort of this final piece here, is that we know when it comes to developing career pathways that within a state, you may have sort of separate career pathways for Head Start, for your public preschool, for family childcare programs, for your community-based programs, and you may end up with a very messy, non-integrated set of career pathways. And at the National ECE Workforce Center, we would like to provide some support to help folks come up with an integrated career pathway so that folks can find themselves, that there is flexibility in that, but creating so many different segmented parts of a career pathway for all these different parts of the sector just is overly confusing, adds administrative burden to everyone, from the administrators to the educators themselves. So when we think about developing these state-specific credentials, are there unintended consequences, or is it allowing for enough growth for ECE, for current ECE educators, that we are okay with sort of adding another option? How does that addition of the other option help or hurt career advancement?
All right. Thank you, Katie. That was a really helpful recap.